Welcome to AA Illustrates. In this episode of AA Illustrates, we're going to be talking about 3 pitfalls keeping your automation program from growing. So let's jump right in. A little bit of background here. We usually do AA Illustrates on super technical deep dive topics where we're looking at building bots or using different functionality within the Automation 360 platform. This week, we're going to be taking a bit of a step back because we're going to be talking about how to grow and scale an automation program. So we all want an automation program that grows and scales. Whether you're just getting started with Automation 360, whether you've been doing this for a couple years, we all want a program that's sustainable and growable. So we're going to be focusing on a 3-part series here on automation practice, growth, and scale. In this first part, we're going to be talking about the start phase, which is really just getting started with your automation program. And we want to talk about 3 pitfalls that are keeping your automation program from growing. Now, I have a special guest joining me for these sessions to help break down all of these concepts. Mark Godair is here. Mark, would you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Always a pleasure, Micah. We've had some of these discussions before. Very happy to be with you. I'm the Director of Automation and Business Transformation for Automation Anywhere, which basically means I lead our internal center of excellence. Some people might not be aware that not only are we helping customers on their journey with automation, but we're drinking our own champagne. So we're also trying to improve our own company through automation. So that's the team that I lead. I actually came from our professional services team, so I spent a few years with them before joining in this capacity. So I was traveling around and helping our customers with exactly the kind of challenges that we're discussing today.
Awesome. And Mark and I have had these kind of conversations going on a couple years now. We talk to each other about these kind of concepts and technical topics. And so we thought it'd be cool to record a couple of them and see how they can help our customers to be able to grow their automation programs. So today, we're going to be focusing on the 3 pitfalls keeping your automation program from growing. Mark, what is the first pitfall that you're seeing organizations run into as they start to set up and grow their automation program?
So pitfall number 1, failing to measure from the start. So this is really all about how do we define the win. So this is a really important topic. If we were to ask ourselves, what does winning look like for an automation program? There might be different answers to that. But a really important exercise to do, it's a question we can ask ourselves is, what does winning look like and how do we measure it? So for example, if you were to ask me, Micah, what am I focused on in our own automation program within the company? I can tell you I've got some very specific objectives. For example, I want the best use cases. I want velocity, right? I don't want to be taking 3 months for a bot that should take 1 month. So I've got some very specific objectives in mind. So I'm trying to set up key performance indicators, metrics that are based around those key objectives. And really important to ask those questions from the outset.
Yeah. So some of the metrics I hear people reporting on quite a bit are, we developed X number of bots this quarter, and I'm sure you've heard that same thing. And while I don't think it's terrible, if that's the only thing you're actually reporting on, you might be measuring and focused on the wrong thing. And in fact, you might be incentivizing the wrong things, right? What other kind of things are you hearing people report on?
Yeah, so what you just mentioned is such a huge point. So I've actually heard some organizations talking about how many lines of code we put into production. What you just mentioned, how many bots we put into production. I wouldn't go so far as to say these are not useful metrics, but it's really, again, about putting the focus on what winning really looks like. So if someone asked me, what's the objective of your automation program? I would not say we want to put code in production. I wouldn't say we just want to crank out bots. No, there's specific value that we're trying to generate, right? So it's important that these metrics be focused on, again, those key objectives. What does it look like winning? Things like value generation, right? So if an organization is trying to implement automation to improve their efficiency, then we can measure things like how many hours we're saving, how many human hours are going away through automation, as an example.
Yeah. And there's 2 things that you and I have talked about before on this, that there's kind of the business value metrics, which is like, what are my bots actually delivering value for the organization? And then there's my automation operational metrics, which I think you hit on earlier, of like, what's my velocity? So what are some of the things that people are measuring in those different areas?
No, it's a really good question. So on the business value side, again, the most common thing we see is the efficiency piece, which is things like hours saved. Some organizations attempt to dollarize that. So that's kind of on the business value side. Other organizations go a bit further into other value drivers. I'll give you a great example. Maybe an automation is going to help us grow our business. It's related to revenue growth. That would be an important business value metric. How much revenue growth are we getting through the automation program? If we're trying to use automation to do things like improve our compliance, our audit compliance, then we can also have metrics around that, right? On the operational side, what you mentioned is really interesting, because one of the key challenges we have in automation is we've got this huge diversity of use cases. So it's a really, really interesting exercise to look at how are we kind of making a factory out of this automation program? How are we delivering our bots? And what kind of metrics really represent winning when we talk about operationalizing it? So if you go into an organization that's involved in manufacturing, for example, they'll look at things like cycle time. How long is it taking from an end-to-end process in terms of delivering something? Why is that not an interesting metric for automation? Maybe today it's taking me X weeks to deliver a bot of a certain complexity. I love that tomorrow I can say I've reduced that. I've introduced some efficiencies, and now I can deliver my bots to production in a shorter period of time. So that's one really, really important metric, measuring things like velocity, how many automations I have in progress right now, what complexity of automations I have. These are all the kind of things that we can look at from an operational standpoint.
Yeah, and one thing I really liked that you said was that measuring the time to delivery based on the complexity, right? Because there has to be that in place. It's not just how long does it take me to build an automation, because that could be like a really tough thing to measure one-to-one. The last thing I want to talk about when it comes to measurements are some of the process-specific metrics. And I've heard some really creative ones here, and I wanted to see if you have heard any of these as well. Things like customer credits used more quickly, employee satisfaction. What other kind of process-specific metrics are you hearing about?
It's a really, really interesting one. So one of the things that we're doing in automation, specifically within Automation Anywhere, that might be a bit unique is, and you kind of hinted on it there, is focused a little bit more on the front office and a little bit more on experience with automation. It's one thing to say, I've got an automation running every night at 2 a.m. and it's saving me a bunch of time. I don't have to generate that data. I don't have to generate those reports anymore. A bot's doing it for me. That's not really necessarily fun. My experience isn't necessarily better, but more and more people want to actually interact with the bots, interact with the automations, introduce products like we have, like Ari. Things like that we're doing these days have the ability to change the game in terms of user experience. So metrics around employee engagement, employee satisfaction, our customer, supplier, partner engagement. We've seen organizations measuring those things where we never really would have before, but now automation actually has the ability to move the needle on metrics like that, where it really didn't have that ability previously.
Very cool. I want to talk about the second pitfall now. And Mark, do you want to introduce this one as well?
Absolutely. So this is use case selection. I can tell you, Micah, in professional services, this was almost a daily discussion. And we have good stories in this regard, and we have horror stories. So this is really, really important, just that we pick the right use cases, in particular at this stage of the journey.
Yeah. And let's break that down a little bit, right? We talked about that this is really the getting started phase. So in what ways do you mentally think of for measuring that getting started?
Right. So the key words here, I think, really are about quick wins. And again, it's important that we dive into that a bit, because what are we talking about when we say a quick win? At the beginning of an automation program, we're really at the outset of it. There might not be a lot of knowledge within the organization on even what we're doing. And as this says here, quick wins build momentum. If we come up with some early successes, then we have the ability to kind of snowball this thing, so more and more people get excited about it, and it's really going to blow up the program, deliver more and more value. So quick wins really refers to those kind of use cases that I'm getting the best bang for the buck. That's a pretty common expression, but I want to put in minimal effort, so a low complexity, and I want to actually deliver some value, obviously, without getting too complex.
Yeah. And so let's talk about the flip side of that. We've all heard of these organizations that, and like, I'll be honest, when I led a COE previously, we fell into this trap a little bit too. You get Automation Anywhere, you bring it in-house, you've got it set up, and you go for that like home run, gigantic ROI process, and it ends up being insanely complex, and it delivers a huge ROI if you can get it done, but you're still like very much learning how to use this software, how it works within your
Yes.
organization and things like that. So is that something that you saw a lot in professional services as well?
100%. And I think of one example. I remember early on in my time in professional services, I was working with a financial services organization, very, very large in Latin America. And I went in there, and it was exactly the case you just mentioned, Micah. So they put up on the screen one of the most hideous business processes I'd seen in a long time. I mean, it was extraordinarily complex. It touched 5 or 6 systems, hundreds of steps. Some of the process steps had a lot of business logic in it, but to your point, the prize at the other end was so appealing. We can save $1 million if we can automate this process. So this is exactly the discussion we had. Look, can this process be automated? I'm sure it can. If not the whole thing, I'm sure the majority of it can. That does not mean it's a good idea now. So exactly like you just mentioned, Micah, the discussion was, let's look at a quick win. And you know what we did in that case was we looked at that end-to-end process, and we zoomed in and we found a sub-process. We did find a piece of it where we could say, hey, what if we were to initially establish a bot that would cover this piece of the process? It's not $1 million of savings. It was something smaller than that. But again, the value was there for the time that we were going to put into it. Now we get something into production. We not only get the business value there, but we've got some learnings, and now we've got something that we can build on.
Yeah, that's great. And just like the slide says here, like large automation initiatives are oftentimes made of those quick wins. So even that much greater process that they maybe eventually were able to automate, it was made up of those quick wins. Like, all right, we're going to take this part of the process, we'll automate that, then we'll move on to the next like part that we can actually section off and try to create.
Absolutely. One of the biggest keys here when we talk about these quick wins, I can give a real quick example. If we talk about what it means to scale automation, there's different ways that we can talk about scale. One way of scaling automation is that we take an automation that one person can use and say, hey, this is actually useful for more than one person. We can deploy this more broadly to a number of users. So we did that recently. We had some opportunities within our sales organization to take an automation that was relatively simple. It had to do with some management of sales opportunities within our CRM system. We were able to take something that really was just a 3 or 4 week development to get the bot up and running. But the value was, hey, we all have this problem. We found that all of our account executives had that same problem. That's exactly the idea. Relatively simple automation, but widely scalable. We can deploy it to many people, and that's where the business value is. Though, imagine the momentum you can get from something like that. All of a sudden, we've got a whole organization excited about automation, but it didn't take us 6 months of a complicated process to do it.
That's awesome. The last thing I want to mention about quick wins is the value to the development team, right? There's obviously the value that's delivered to the organization by completing something that's now automated. I think there's a value for the development team learning some of those best practices. How are we going to do variables? How are we going to do documentation? How do we do testing? Can you talk a little bit about that?
No, there's no question about it. Of course, we've got the Automation Anywhere University. We've got all sorts of ways that we can help equip people on this process. But honestly, there's no substitute for experience. And if you remember, for those of us that have delivered automations, you remember the first time you did it, exactly as you just said, Micah. There's going to be a learning curve. The learning curve is there's a few different facets to it. One is just what does it take to deliver a bot to production? What does it take to define the use case? What does it take to design and develop it? What does it take to test it? What does it take to get it into production? There's that bit of learning. The other bit of learning is there's always use case specifics, right? So let's say that you're building an automation, automating Workday or Salesforce or PeopleSoft, all these different applications, or maybe your legacy application. There's a learning curve there too. You're going to realize, it's like that old expression, I think from Ben Franklin. It was about the discovery of the invention of the light bulb. And he talked about, he figured out 1,000 ways not to do something. That's what the process is like when you're delivering an automation. Sometimes you discover there are some wrong ways or some bad ways of delivering automation. You can capture those learnings, and that improves your delivery going forward.
Very cool. All right, I want to round out with the third pitfall. And Mark, what is the third pitfall from keeping an organization from growing their automation program?
So the third pitfall is being a little bit quiet about your success. So we can't assume that just because we're excited about the automation program, even just because we're delivering high value automations, we can't assume that anybody knows or cares about that. And that means it's a real key responsibility within a center of excellence to make sure that we blow the trumpet and let people know about the wins that we're delivering.
Absolutely. I remember the first time someone explained to me about RPA, and they said like, "Oh, it's this like robot that like sits behind you and it watches your screen and then it starts to take over your keyboard." And it sounded like the creepiest, like scary thing ever, that this robot is just kind of like looking over my shoulder and watching what I'm doing.
Like a science fiction movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was horrible evangelism by the part of the person who explained this to me, because they didn't explain it correctly to me. And I think that's part of what's really important here, right? It's letting people know about the success of your program and what you're delivering. And then it's also like kind of showing them a bit about what the bot can do. Maybe record a quick clip of your bot that's running and show it how it works. That way people can really get a flavor for what automations are capable of, what they look like when they're actually executing. And I think that helps to build some excitement around the program. You know,
Absolutely.
when you and I talked about this before, you talked about the 3 C's, and I want to make sure we touch on that here. Letting people know about how to engage, and you define them as contributors, consumers, and creators. And I really like that. So first off, what is a contributor? What does it mean for them to learn about automation? Break that down a little bit.
Awesome. So these 3 C's, Micah, really to me, this is all about building a culture of automation. All right. So again, we started off this session, we were talking about what it means to win in automation and some things about how we measure it. When we talk about building a culture of automation, really what that means to me is more and more engagement of our workforce in terms of increasing automation and making all of our work a little bit more enjoyable, a little bit more human. So these 3 C's are really about 3 different ways that people in the organization can engage. The first one, when we talk about contributors, what we're talking about is contributing an idea. Now, if you ask me who can contribute an idea, the answer is absolutely everyone. Literally, there's not one person in the organization that couldn't contribute an idea for automation. So this is a really, really important thing. Back to the topic of what we want to track. This is something that we track really, really carefully in our COE. Who's contributing ideas, what kind of ideas they are. We want to celebrate people that are submitting real good ideas. So this one's all about generating ideas for automation.
Yeah, I like that. And the incentivizing it, I think, is a really cool idea, because you want people to feel like there's a reason that they would do this, and that they can be, they can be recognized for their contributions of ideas. And this helps to inform your backlog of automation opportunities, which I think is awesome. Tell me a little bit about consumers.
So when we talk about consumers, we're talking about people that are using or receiving the benefits of automation. So for example, if we deploy an automation, the one I mentioned earlier that we deployed it to our sales team, and the sales team are actually invoking or running automation and getting some benefit out of that, those are consumers. So we want everybody in the company contributing ideas. I think we want everybody in the company that's got a digital worker beside them, they've got access to bots, and they're taking advantage of that digital workforce to make their work more efficient and more enjoyable. So consumers, we're talking about, we want more and more people in the organization that are reaping the benefits of automation.
Absolutely. And that's going back to our first point. That's another metric you can track, the percent of your organization that are enabled by these automations. All right. The last one is
Absolutely.
Creator. Break down what a creator is.
So a creator, if you're familiar with the expression citizen development, which I think is an interest of a lot of organizations these days, that's really what we're referring to here. We're talking about who's creating new automations or developing new bots. It's a nice idea that you've got a center of excellence, and many organizations have a center of excellence up and running. But really, when we look long term, the key to scaling is going to be that this creation ability, the ability to create new bots and automations, extends beyond a center of excellence, even exists in the business units. I know we'll be talking more about that. So we want more and more people that are skilled and ready and excited to develop new bots.
Yep, that's awesome. And I think one of the most important things about this building awareness is you want to identify who can be your automation champions or your change agents within the organization. Because as you start to grow your program, maybe you move to like federated development, maybe you move to starting to deliver automations for a new functional area. Those automation champions can help to kind of be your inroads into those different organizational areas, so that, hey, now we're starting to take ideas from the sales team, or now we're starting to take ideas from HR, where we were previously working in finance. So I think it's really important that you're kind of keeping track of like who's getting really excited about the evangelism that we're doing internally and how they can be activated.
I love that. Exactly that concept. I mean, another way to put that would be it's kind of the internal marketing. Of course, we want to market in all different directions, but it's really, really important that we're letting people know about it. And exactly what you just said is so critical, that we identify people that really, really interesting is people that weren't necessarily believers and became believers. We have those, believe it or not, even within our own organization, some folks that were maybe a bit skeptical about how really powerful is this. Yet a bot was delivered or a digital worker was delivered, and they can see the before and after, and it was a positive change, and they're absolutely willing to go out and tell others so that they can reap the same benefit.
That's awesome. All right. So as a recap, I want to have some actionable takeaways for each of these, and let's talk through this a little bit. So first off, when I'm setting up my business value metrics, what are some actionable takeaways that I can focus on leaving this session?
Right. So I think the very first one, Micah, is to think about why are we doing this automation program in the first place, and defining the win in terms of metrics. Again, what does it look like to have a really, really powerful, impactful automation program up and running? One of the most important ones, how much business value are we delivering? I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong answer, but the important thing is that you establish some kind of metrics that you can track ongoing so that you know that you're improving. So I think the first one is to take the time to think a little bit about what kind of metrics can we define that'll let us know, are we winning and are we getting better?
Yeah, and definitely consistently reporting on that across all of your opportunities, right? Because if one group is doing it one way and one is doing it another, that will be really problematic when this roll up happens and you have to report on the program success. So totally agree with you there. Starting with quick wins, what's an actionable takeaway? If I'm just getting started with my automation program, what can I focus on?
So starting with quick wins, the idea there would be, how can we identify a few use cases that are not so complex, but there's genuinely business value? So here we ask ourselves the question, what makes a quick win use case? When we talk about complexity, we're thinking about things that don't have too many steps, not dealing with too many applications. But if we're going to apply RPA to it, we want it to be something that's automatable, right? Where there's some rules or some repetitive activities that we can automate. And again, keep your eye on those kind of activities that are done by multiple workers. My antennas continually go up when I hear an idea where someone says, "Oh, we all do that within the team." I always ask them, "How many people in the team?" Right? So we're looking for those things that are not so complex, not so many steps, not so many applications, but hopefully they've got business value, and hopefully they've got some scale potential in terms of, when we get that up and running, we can deploy that to 10 or 20 or more people.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I think as an automation lead, one of the important things to focus on here is like, not only are we delivering for the organization, but we're gaining experience as we do it, right? And how do we take full advantage of that so that our next deliveries can be even smoother, even more efficient, things like that.
Absolutely.
The last one we'll talk about is evangelizing your success. What's a actionable takeaway here?
I think the important thing here is there's no right or wrong way to do this, but the important thing here is to think about, how are we going to do this? So let's imagine that we've just delivered our first really, really impactful automation. It took us a little bit of time to deliver it, but it's delivering some significant value. How are we going to package that and let people know? Again, there's no right or wrong answer, but it's really, really neat to put your creative hat on. Maybe even connect with folks in your marketing organization and talk about, how can we send out something? How can we broadcast this win? It could be something like a newsletter. It could be meetings with different business units to do demo videos, that kind of roadshow concept. It could be putting together a short video that can be distributed, but something that's going to show people and to show people really what that win looks like. And the key thing really is ultimately, what was the business problem I had? What was the challenge? Could be something as simple as it was taking me several hours a week to perform this activity, and then how did the automation help you? It's kind of that before and after, so people can really see this change is positive, and it's really, really impactful, and that gets people thinking in terms of how else could we use this technology.
Yeah, tangibly, when we started our automation program at my previous employer, we actually had a website that was like a collection of these videos that people had built of like, this is an automation in HR, this is an automation in back office. And so you could come and watch it. And some of them admittedly were a bit corny, but like at a certain point, they did show what the automation was doing. You got to see the screen, you got to see what was happening. And that was really impactful for people around the organization to like, okay, I didn't just hear about there's this automation that exists. I've seen part of it run and it was really cool and it went really fast and things like that. So I think the point you made about creativity is huge here.
Absolutely. We've got lots of great videos on YouTube as well, where we've interviewed people within Automation Anywhere, for example, that have exactly those kind of testimonials about how digital workers have helped them. And that's a really, really great resource. And organizations can leverage that and do something similar within their organization as well.
Yeah. And we have a lot of great YouTube videos on some of that stuff as well. We've got some examples of bots that have been delivered and kind of you can watch them run end to end. So you can use that as an example of one you may look at. Mark, I want to thank you for your time. This was an awesome session. This has been AA Illustrates. Please be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll be back with phase 2 of this, where we're going to start to look at what do you do in the accelerate phase of your automation program. As you're starting to grow and as you've moved on to a certain point, we're going to look at some of the ways that you can hack your way to accelerated growth. So thanks so much for your time. Go be great.